Well, there's fresh rumblings of in-party fighting within the National Party, as Graham Richardson just alluded to, speculating that the Deputy Prime Minister, Michael McCormack, is facing a leadership challenge. Meanwhile, Nationals MP Barnaby Joyce is advocating the abolition of the states amidst the border debacle, creating headaches for farmers and residents. He joins me now. Barnaby, we might get the more controversial one out of the way first up. Good to see you.
Richo doesn't have to worry about me tossing out McCormack because I'm not even in the race. I mean, I can tell you that was the biggest surprise to me reading that article last night. And you either believe me or you don't. I've got nothing to do with it. So I'd go talk to someone else. I mean, I don't think Jeff Chambers is a fool. There's no doubt about it. He's obviously interviewed a number of people, but he didn't interview me, and so I don't know anything about it. So, Richo, you can remove yourself from any concerns because I had my shot and it's gone, and now we've, as I said, you've got Big Mac and ScoMo, Big Mo, and they can ride off in the McCormack-Morrison government and take us to the next election, and I wish them all the very best.
What'd you call them, Barnaby? Bomo? Big Mac?
Well, Big Mac and ScoMo. I'm Barjoy, I suppose. So anyway, Big Mac and ScoMo, so that's Big Mo.
That's a classic. I love it. Now, I think this is a tremendous idea, abolishing the states. There are 1,000 bureaucrats in the state and territory government system. And I think, and you know what, Barnaby, I wrote a piece on this not that long ago. I've never had as many emails from people saying we need to abolish the states.
Agreeing with you.
A lot of
Agreeing with you.
If we had a 100%. If we had a referendum on this, it'd be close.
They'd be gone. They'd be gone. Look, it's the biggest thing I get in chambers of commerce, in rotary meetings, the people on the street. They go, listen, why do we have 3 tiers of government? Why is this the case? And I said, well, in 1901, it made a lot of sense. In 1901, when you crapped in your toilet, a man came along and picked it up with a horse. I mean, things have moved on. In 1901, people didn't go across state borders like they go across their front gate. In 1901, they didn't have telephones. In 1901, they didn't have electricity. In 1901, the world was a much more remote place. And in 2020, the reason we have states, God only knows, and it costs us tens of billions of dollars a year in administration. We've got to try and find some form of deregulation. You can't deregulate if you insist on having the same number of regulators because they've got to find themselves a job. And they find themselves a job by creating arbitrary decisions on borders and, creating little fiefdoms and turning themselves into a form of East Germany where people are allowed in and people are allowed out, which is all a load of rubbish. And, this is, rather than base it on epidemiology, they base it on parochialism to try and garner a support because they're sort of lacking meaning in other ways. We've got to, if we should give it to the Australian people, do you want to move on or do you want to stick with this form of government? Because the states are putting themselves out of business. Where they were in 1901 is a million miles from where they are now, and I can assure you it's not going to change, and by 2050 they're even going to be less relevant. Now, the state politicians and state bureaucrats will lose their mind, but I'll give them a sense of future. You will make very good federal politicians, or we'll have larger regional governments, regional politicians. But we can't have 3 tiers of government. So you've got a state health minister, a federal health minister, local health officials. How do you go about deregulating when you've got everybody trying to make themselves relevant by coming up with new regulations?
And Barnaby, we've seen this pandemic has exposed the futility and the downright narcissism of some of these state and territory leaders by the way in which they've put their borders up. You've got kids in northern New South Wales requiring, emergency medical treatment normally would go to a Brisbane hospital, which of course is funded by the Commonwealth anyway, and they can't get in. Medical negligence is what a doctor said on this program the other night. I think a lot of people in this country right now, and I think it's a scandal the way the bush has been treated during this pandemic. I think it's terrible.
Yeah, it's as wacky as fried chocolate. It just doesn't work. And it's you've got people saying, oh well, you can't go to a hospital in our state because that makes me feel good, Anastasia Palaszczuk. Well, it's not. It's It's a dopey statement. If someone's sick, we're saying they can't go from Urbanville to Stanthorpe. I mean, how does that work? You got poor old Dan Andrews. There's a man with a 1,000-yard stare. He's completely out of his depth. It fell down around his ears. You've got other states that are thinking, oh, we've got to get into this bravado game as well, so we're going to say these ridiculous statements based on parochialism, not on epidemiology. You know, if we went back to where, like 1788, you had closer settlement. For better or for worse, first fleet turned up. So we're about, what's it make? About 232 years on from 1788, if my maths is rough and correct. Now, if you went from the Mayflower in the United States, 1620 around about that turned up, so that takes them to about, 1852, something like that. By that stage, they had over 30 states and territories. So they dealt with regional issues by creating more states. Now, if you don't want to create more states, and I imagine a lot of people don't, then get rid of the states you got and have stronger regional governments. It's just, when you look at the states, they're arbitrary lines on a map. If you want to say, oh, they're historically relevant, well, let's go back to Aboriginal First Nations. They're even more historically relevant. Let's go back to them. We'll have, 100 states, or how is it going to work? But we should be logical. We'll say we've got an island continent, and we would have a lot better government if we had 2 tiers, reduce costs. God knows we're going to need to reduce costs. We've got a debt you couldn't... I mean, it's massive. It's heading to $1 trillion. So somebody somewhere's got to find some savings. And I can tell you a good part to start with would be to reduce your regulation. And I know that, you know that, the punters know that, but governments won't touch it because they don't want to step on their mates' toes. But, it's a debate that you guys are going to have to run. And I bet you if you put a poll up, you would be surprised with how many people, both on the left and the right, agree with us.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea. I'll suggest to the editor of the Courier-Mail we run a poll because I think it's very important. Before we go, Barnaby, the New South Wales Government has accepted today the 76 recommendations from the summer bushfire inquiry. Yeah. A lot of it relates to the fact that we're going to get back to back-burning on properties. We're going to make sure that we don't have this situation where there's this massive build-up of fuel that's occurred in the past, which is obviously good news.
Well, it's really simple. Have you ever tried to burn a concrete path? It doesn't go so well. But if I stick a heap of leaves and grass, it'll burn. So reduce your fuel load, you reduce your fire risk, and all of a sudden it's come back to people on the land who wanted to burn off, and they're saying, now you have to burn off or we'll fine you for that. Well, good. Well, get out of our way and let us backburn, which is what we always wanted to do in the first place. And the rest, I read through the 76 recommendations, they're motherhood statements, most of them, more research, more thought, more love. But, if you want to get down to... We should have dams in national parks, so we've got access to water. Dams in state forests, so we've got access to water. Proper fire trails. Clear your trees back from your roads and let farmers reduce their fuel load by burning off and get your tree police away from us.
Yep. Good to see you tonight, Barnaby. Thanks for joining us.
Good on you, Gleeson. See you, mate.
See you, mate. The New South Wales Government has accepted all 76 recommendations, as we just mentioned, from an independent inquiry into the Black Summer bushfires. Some of the changes include allowing landowners more freedom to carry out hazard reduction burns on their own properties and adopting military-style firefighting tactics.